just say no. Kids are too smart for that. They want science behind that, why they shouldn't be doing it. These kids could get a hold of this and that it was such high potency. Talk to your kid. Don't sit down at the dining room table and say, now we're going to have a talk. For a safe, healthy, and drug-free community.
Watch Step Up to Save Our Children today.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Step Up to Save Our Children. I'm Denise, and today we're talking about something many parents assume won't ever happen to their child, until it does. College hazing is often dismissed as tradition, team bonding, or just part of the experience. But across campuses, hazing continues to cause serious emotional harm, hospitalizations, and even sadly, sometimes loss of life. If you have a high school junior, senior, or current college student, this conversation is for you. I'm joined today by Meredith Stewart from Stop Hazing and Dr. Elizabeth Allan. Stop Hazing is a national organization dedicated to preventing hazing and changing the culture on campuses. Today, we're going to break down what hazing actually looks like in 2026, why smart, intelligent young people often go along with it, the red flags that parents have no idea and often miss, and what laws like Collin's law here in Ohio mean for families, and the one conversation that every parent should have before move-in day. So, because protecting our kids is the top and most important thing that we can do, and it doesn't end with high school graduation, let's begin. Hello, ladies. I'm so excited to have you on. So let me tell you a little bit about our guests. Meredith Stewart has a master's in education and serves as operations manager for Stop Hazing, overseeing operational aspects of Stop Hazing, including program management, training implementation, and resource development in alignment with the organization's mission to prevent hazing through research-based initiatives and strategic partnerships. Meredith also supports the work of the Hazing Prevention Advocacy, consulting services, and developing Stop Hazing's suite of online learning tools and courses. Through her work, she cultivates essential relationships with higher education institutions, professional organizations, scholars, practitioners, and policy advocates committed to violence prevention. She earned both her master's in student development in higher education and her bachelor's in secondary education from the University of Maine. Her journey with Stop Hazing began during her graduate studies as a research assistant before transitioning to full-time leadership positions. Her time with Stop Hazing and experience in both higher education and secondary education environments bring a greater understanding to implementing comprehensive education and prevention strategies. So welcome, Meredith, and let's talk a little bit about Elizabeth. Elizabeth Allan, Ph.D., is an internationally recognized leader in the study of hazing and its prevention. She is professor of higher education at the University of Maine, where she directs the Hazing Prevention Research Lab, and principal at Stop Hazing, where she founded and leads the Hazing Prevention Consortium, a path-breaking research to practice initiative that guides campus prevention efforts while building an evidence base. Allan was the lead investigator for the National Study of Student Hazing in 2008, the most comprehensive examination of hazing in the U.S., and currently leads its relaunch. Her research focuses on campus culture and climate, with particular emphasis on hazing, harm prevention, and institutional change. Allan has authored 3 books, 55 peer-reviewed journal articles and chapters, and 60 technical reports. Busy lady. Her work has appeared in leading journals, including the Harvard Educational Review, the Journal of Higher Education, Review of Higher Education, Journal of Student Affairs Research and Practice, Journal of American College Health, Qualitative Studies in Education, and the Journal of Interpersonal Violence. She has briefed the U.S. Senate Help Committee presented to the Department of Defense and served as a subject matter expert at U.S. congressional briefings and discussion for the Stop Campus Hazing Act. Her expertise is widely sought by the media, and there's a whole list of media outlets that have sought her and cited her in thousands of news articles. So, ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having us.
Well, I'm excited because this has been a topic that has been on my radar for probably over a year, and finding the right people to talk about it was a little bit more challenging. So I'm so happy to have found you. And I guess the first thing I want to ask both of you, chime in however you want, is what led both of you to become involved in this hazing prevention work? Was it a personal thing, or just tell me how that worked?
So, well, for me, I'll start us off.
Okay.
I first got involved in this work when I was working as a campus professional. My first full-time professional role, I was working with college students in leadership development and student activities. And, in the process of working with students around becoming leaders, becoming effective leaders in their groups, they started to share with me some of the experiences they were having related to hazing. And I think at the time they weren't necessarily sharing it because they were, well, I guess they were concerned about it. They wouldn't have shared otherwise, but they weren't thinking that it was a policy violation. It
Okay.
was just something bad that was happening and they didn't like it. So I immediately saw the potential harm and decided that I was in a role where I could do something to help educate the students, not only just to educate them about the potential harm that could come from hazing, but to help them build the skills to intervene themselves and to be effective leaders that could help to create organizations where this kind of behavior wasn't kept as a tradition. So that was what first got me started. And during that time, I realized there was no state law prohibiting hazing at the university where I was. So students joined me in building a proposal for a state law and then lobbying state legislators. And the more we worked on this, the more I realized the need for education. We did get that law passed, um, and then I went on to earn my PhD and become a researcher. So fast forward, I stayed
Yeah.
involved with the issue, and then turned my attention to helping make change as a researcher.
Absolutely. And what about you, Meredith? Was anything personal, or was this just your lifelong passion?
Thanks, Denise, for the question. And to reflect back and go down memory lane a bit, I was a very involved student when I was at the university in undergrad. And that really is what led me to the field of higher education, and transitioning from secondary ed into the student affairs and higher ed space instead. Um, but the internship that I had with Stop Hazing is really what changed my perspective about, or illuminated me to have a perspective about just how harmful hazing is, and how pervasive and widespread it is. And then also recognizing that there wasn't much out there for prevention resources, and that the narrative is still, at that time, there was such an opportunity to really make some big change. And so to be a part of an organization and a team that's really helping move the needle and put resources out there into the hands of students, parents, college and university professionals, organizations, it feels like really impactful work. And that is, I'm really passionate about that and grateful to be in a with a team that is doing that sort of work.
Well, it's so important. And one of the things that I want to jump into is my lack of education about it from the standpoint that when you think about it and the shows that are on TV and all it you get a preconception of alcohol and fraternities. And from what I was reading on Stop Hazing and some of the other things that I was jumping into, it's the athletics too, and it's other organizations. And I think that's probably what most parents will be completely surprised about. So if either one of you want to jump in on that one, I just think Boys in the Boat was a movie that I watched. And, that was my first opening to the whole concept. I think that there was also that kind of hazing for that type of thing. So whatever you can add to that.
Mm. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, hazing in athletics and fraternities and sororities, in our studies, they tend to have the highest percentage of students who experience hazing. But when we had the data for the national study back in 2008, and since then, with the data we've collected, we've continued to find that hazing's happening in all these other arenas that people like yourself are generally surprised to find. For example, in
Mhm.
performing arts organizations, in
Mm.
intramural sports. It's not just varsity athletics, but club sports and intramural sports. Also in honor societies. I think that I mean it can be in many other types of groups as well, but we have found consistently that hazing is happening in these types of groups. And so we need to help people reframe what they think about when they think of hazing, because otherwise they're going to miss some of the warning signs because
Mhm.
they're not necessarily looking for it in all these types of groups.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like, like I said, this idea, perception, I would guess it would be, is that it's getting young people to do something, that is scary, the alcohol and whatever. There's other different things. But it seems like that perception is, I guess, there's bullying and then there's hazing. And I
Hmm.
guess maybe if you could talk about that, either one of you, about what the difference is.
Sure. Do you want me to go first, Meredith?
Well, yeah, so bullying, there are certainly some overlaps there. And we have a great resource on our website that portrays both hazing and bullying with a Venn diagram visual,
Hmm.
because there are certainly overlaps and there's harm. And bullying often happens as an exclusionary practice. And whereas hazing you could think about as it happens because people are joining or maintaining a status in a group or a club or a team, and so the intention is for inclusion, whereas bullying, the intention is excluding somebody, and so those are two key distinctions there, and if we take a moment to just think about the definition of hazing, this might be a good time to do that as we're talking
Hmm.
about as
Absolutely.
with bullying, and the two are often conflated, but that distinction of hazing happening in a group context, as somebody is joining or maintaining that membership in the group, whether that's a team, a club, a society, and so on, and that there's harm involved,
Hmm.
psychological, emotional, physical, and that it happens regardless of a person's willingness to participate. And that third piece is a really important component of the definition if you break it down into those three parts, and that hazing, it's regardless of consent. And so we hear often that, oh, well, we had a choice to do this, or, oh, they could have said no. But
Mm.
there's that part of the definition gets to the aspects of peer pressure and a coercive environment. And when you have those two things together, it's you can't provide a true consent. And they didn't really have a choice not to participate. So anyways, that's just a little more to
No,
expand on that.
well, no, that's great. That really helps me to understand it, the inclusion versus the, because we think about it is just tradition. That's what a lot of people would say,
Hmm.
and as people get older, they'll refer back to something that happened when they were in a fraternity or, whatever. And, oh, it's hilarious, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there's a funny aspect to something that somebody did, but honestly, the harm, um, and I'd like for you to address this, is not always just physical, but emotional for the person being victimized, but also the people doing it.
That's right. Yeah. And I think, that's such a common uh, point of conversation around, the funny aspects or positive memories of hazing experiences when there wasn't any,
Hmm.
lifelong harm. But the reality is that those things could have happened without hazing. You could have positive memories and good laughs and fun without having the risk of harm, the potential to hurt people either physically or psychologically. And what you asked about, I think, is so vital for everyone to understand because it's so often invisible. The kinds of harm that comes from hazing that are psychological that people don't see on the outside. And so it's easy to minimize it or completely discount it or dismiss it. And yet we know from the research that many, 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 many individuals experience psychological harm from hazing, and the scars from that can endure for years and can result in things, anxiety and depression
Hmm.
that can lead to suicidality and so forth. And it's very, it can be life threatening in that way as well. So, thank you for bringing that point forward. And I think we're doing a lot more than ever before to help educate people about the overlap between hazing and mental health and student well-being, and use that and it resonates with students because students want to support their peers'
Hmm.
mental health and well-being. And so when we can and families of course too, so when we can talk about it from that angle, I think that people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and that's a good
Exactly.
reason. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do you think about? I mean, in my mind, you have some inebriated in some capacity, young people, whatever, that are now, thinking about doing something to a pledge. Or I'm just going with that. I mean, it could be, a junior varsity person. I mean, it could be a lot of things, but they're not, their brains, of course, are not fully developed, as we know at that age, but that they are also then, not playing, they're not sober themselves, so then it probably, would you say, becomes a lot easier for them to go along? Because one of the questions is, why do, typically, um, I don't know which, just regular kids that, you would think would never partake of this, all of a sudden do?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and that is, I'm so glad you raised that point as well, because it's often a reflexive sort of self-protective mechanism that I hear from parents like myself, who will say, "Oh, that is so sad. That happened to them. They must have been so desperate for friends," or something to immediately justify
Hmm.
what happened and and assure themselves that that won't happen to their child. And that is just so far from the reality that we
Hmm.
have seen time and time again with the victims of hazing, and parents who have lost their children to hazing, where those students have been um, really socially highly regarded, doing well academically or athletically. I mean, in so many ways, very successful, and the kind of students who many would aspire to be. And so, it's the point you raised about alcohol being involved and or other drugs
Mm-hmm.
And that impairing judgment is a huge one because that definitely does happen. And that's why, another reason why, as Meredith mentioned, that clause is in the definition of hazing, that hazing can happen regardless of consent because, we have to recognize the many ways in which judgment can be impaired and therefore a true consent can be impeded. So, alcohol and other drugs are a factor. Also, the peer pressure
Mm-hmm.
that Meredith mentioned, combined with that really strong desire, human desire, to want to belong to something. And also we have to look at skills. There's so many times students are just taken by surprise by hazing, a hazing situation that they find themselves in, and they don't feel prepared, even though they know it's something that is in conflict with their own values.
Right.
They have a hard time taking action in that moment. So one of the things we're really working on is helping to build those skills for students to feel they can effectively intervene in a safe way.
Absolutely. So, what do you think are some of the things why the reason I guess that this hazing is sort of embedded to a certain extent in college culture? I mean, do you think it's the movies? Do you think, what do you think on that? Either one, jump in, Meredith, if you want.
Mhm. Well, I'm so many traditions and cultural aspects of college and university campuses are really ingrained traditions, or various parts of the community. And we know from public health research, and other areas of research around culture shifting and organizational change, how complex it is to shift human behavior, how complex it is to shift culture. Um, and so when these systems are ingrained for, in many cases, hundreds of years, it can be very difficult to get in there and to really make some change. So it takes a great deal of commitment to do that, whether that's from students themselves, but generally, if you zoom out and look at what these systems are, the institutions, the national organizations, alumni associations, there are so many
Mm-hmm.
factors that
Mm-hmm.
play into an environment, um, and influence those environments. And so really getting to the root of it, and what are these influences, and then how do we work to either work with them and shift behavior that aligns with um, the desire or the traditions, the goals of these traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that to build community? Is that to build strong leaders? Um, Whatever it is, likely hazing is in conflict with what those values, that mission statement, that vision for the institution, for example. And so helping make those connections, that hazing
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely in conflict with what we say we stand for here. Um, so that could be a great first step. And then we know that there are so many more in order to make lasting change that sticks. And that it takes a village to make that happen.
Right. Well, and you all are dealing with so many different colleges, universities across the country that all probably have a little bit different take on some of this. And uh, um, Elizabeth, you mentioned too, that you were working with leadership, and trying to get the kids to understand how to become a great leader and whatever. And then you throw them into a fraternity thing, and maybe they're going to take the lead on that. Maybe they're not. But I mean, the team bonding is so important. And I often talk about that our young kids are just seeking connections so badly.
Mhm.
And so now they've survived high school and now they're gone to college and they have to find their people. They have to find their
Mhm.
support people, people that they can relate to and have a good time. And then of course there's always the people that are from backgrounds where the alumni, it's such an important thing. Maybe it's a legacy, I don't
Mhm.
know. And so then, so could you address something about that, like how that bonding should happen, but sometimes doesn't?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being anti-hazing doesn't mean anti-bonding
Right.
or anti-tradition.
Hmm.
We're in support of bonding and group
Hmm.
cohesion and healthy traditions, and really it's about how to get there. That's what is the behavior we want to see? We want to see
Hmm.
people, everyone being able to belong, to feel they have a
Right.
sense of belonging, find their people
Hmm.
on campus, and thrive. And so we believe that can happen if we can cultivate healthy groups and teams. And so that's one of the things we're really working on in terms of, in thinking about a public health approach is like, okay, what's the behavior you want to see and
Hmm.
how do you build the skills to get there? And Meredith has been instrumental in developing a program that we have in collaboration with the One Love Foundation, but it's called 10 Signs of Healthy and Unhealthy Groups. And we're using it as it's a hazing prevention strategy, a workshop and train the trainer program, and resources for anyone. We have it available on our website. So anyone can access it. But it's really resonating with students and campus communities as far as providing a really simple framework for helping students to recognize when the behavior in a group might be a little bit toxic or trending toward toxic, and therefore doesn't necessarily mean it's a hazing culture, but it's far more likely that it's a culture where hazing could occur, in comparison to in contrast, what does it look like to be part of a healthy group or
Right.
team, and how can they have, feel empowered to be a part of that?
Sure. Well, how can students, when you're doing some of these, I mean, obviously they could get online or whatever, but I'm sure that like the colleges have in-person lectures or webinars or something where they maybe make the kids come and, or it's, they don't make them, but you know what I mean, that it's something they should do or get extra credit for. But what do you say to students who are trying to stand up to a situation that they feel is unhealthy in like a fraternity or athletics or whatever? What can they do? I mean, they're pretty young usually themselves, probably under 22. So, what does that look like? Either one of you?
Well, often, if there's one person who is feeling like they need to stand up against whatever it is that's happening, there's probably at least somebody else who is ready to do that too.
Mhm.
And so reassuring students, and empowering them to be talking with their peers, to be asking these questions, to get curious, not just accept things for what they are, how they've been presented to them. In this case, a hazing activity, or an unhealthy ritual or tradition that the team is doing or the group is doing. Um, and to get curious and see, because you start asking questions, so probably in most cases other students are going to come out of the from behind the scenes, or start or share their voice, share their perspective, and then all of a sudden you've got some power in numbers, and can say, hey, no, we actually don't want to do this, or we're going to sit this one out, we don't think that's a good idea, as a great first step. Bystander intervention, and applying the 5 steps of bystander intervention. Skill building is a piece of that. So being able to recognize hazing, is the first thing that we have to help educate folks on how to do, and then recognize that it's a problem, and then understanding that you have some responsibility to do something about it, but building the skills in order to then do that and then take the action. And so everyone's going to perhaps be in a different place on that 5-step scale, but we have to start someplace, and really helping students to recognize hazing or unhealthy behaviors generally is the first step. And when we hopped on here today, we were talking about how hazing, when you say hazing, maybe somebody immediately thinks about alcohol, or they immediately think about a fraternity. And yes, that's true. Hazing happens in fraternities, and hazing very much is happening with alcohol use or other drug use. And we know, if you think about hazing happening across a spectrum, we have a great graphic we can share with folks on the Stop Hazing website. But there's an inverse relationship between the frequency of which hazing behaviors occur and their recognition. So if we think about alcohol related hazing behaviors, they are in the violent-based category of hazing. They're really highly recognized as hazing. And there are so many other hazing behaviors that happen on the other side of that continuum or that spectrum that are much less visible or much less recognized as hazing and happening at a higher frequency. So if we can get students, parents, community members to recognize those unhealthy behaviors that are at this lower end of the spectrum, intimidation type hazing behaviors, acts of servitude, things that you might dismiss as harmless pranks or antics or just boys being boys scenarios. We can intervene sooner before hazing activities escalate, and we know that that's true. The data that we've collected point to, if students are experiencing these behaviors that are happening more frequently but are not being recognized as such, they're more likely to experience the more violent types of hazing behaviors.
And if I could just add something to
Please.
what Meredith said, which is based on our research, the vast majority of students, when we ask them, do they think hazing is a good way to welcome new members to their clubs, teams, organizations, they say no. But when we ask them, what do you think your peers think? They think their peers think it's a good way. So
Wow.
yes. And so we really are working to use that data in what's called the social norms approach, where we work to correct the misperceived norm. So they think it's the norm that their peers support this behavior, which is going to make them far less comfortable speaking up. They're going to think they're the only one. So the more that we can help them to understand what's really true, that the majority of their peers do not support this behavior, the more empowered they're going to feel, or confident, I think, in speaking up when something doesn't align with their values.
So would you say that the universities, and I'm sure you deal with so many different colleges, universities, whatever, but are they doing enough? Do they embrace this whole concept and really try to make sure this isn't happening on their campus? I mean, they're obviously liable when somebody has, serious hospitalization or death or whatever, but what does that look like?
It's a good question, and it's continuing to evolve. And some institutions are very visibly demonstrating commitment to hazing prevention. And then, of course, there are others that are in very much a reactionary stage or status. And the federal law that was passed at the end of 2024 has been instrumental in really helping to shift what prevention is looking like on campuses. And with a federal law, with any type of new policy, requiring institutions to take another look at this. While some are certainly going above and beyond what's required of a law, and we think about that as very much the floor and not the ceiling of what should be done for hazing prevention. And at least now there's a benchmark or a floor for institutions that they're now required to be thinking about hazing prevention. Everybody has to have, or all institutions have to now have a policy in place. There are new reporting requirements. So all institutions need to include hazing incidents as statistics in their annual security reports or Clery reports, commonly known as. That information is available to the public as well. Institutions, if they have incidents of hazing on campus, they need to publicly report that out in a transparency report that's also available on their website. Education and being able to share with folks what they're doing for education is also a requirement of the law. So you could see how that could be the implementation of this may look different on every campus, and how much education is being provided. Is it to all students? Is it to certain types of groups, clubs, teams, and orgs? Is it to everybody in the community, faculty, staff included? And so there will be a range of what that looks like, but that transparency and new accountability measures are certainly requiring institutions to pay more attention to hazing prevention.
Well, I think even with this, with the athletics, because you might have a coach, or assistant coach or whatever of a different, I don't know. I've just picked up rowing. I don't know why I said that one, but, that are really wanting to win, wanting to really push the kids as much as they can. But they also are liable for not doing anything about hazing, or if they're aware of it. And I think a lot of them are way more aware than what we think. So that makes sense to me, that, with the universities. But the next part to that is, and that is a law, I don't mean that way, but certain states, and I'm from Ohio, we have some anti-hazing um, laws on the books now, that if a child is engaged in that, it can go anywhere from different level misdemeanors, but all the way to a level 3 felony should someone die. And that has been the experience of two of the young people in the last 3 or 4 years that have died at our universities here in Ohio. And some of them that were participating in that or covering it up have ended up with some sort of a conviction. And I think, gosh, I mean, if you're a young kid coming into college and you're educated by your university or whatever about the ramifications of being involved in this, I would think that'd be a huge, thing that would jump up in their minds and think, well, I mean, my goodness, that'll be the whole rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that with some of I think there's a lot of states that have some kind of anti-hazing. I'm not sure, but I know Ohio does now. Because one of the young men died. That's why, that's what starts this whole thing, and as I was saying to my husband, when you have a grieving parent that has lost a child, they're walking around with a hole in their heart. And many of them, of course, thankfully, start different things like, different foundations to educate. And we can't have too many people educating, that's for sure, because the masses are not.
Right.
So I'm sure that is all part of your mission. But one of the things, I think it's on your website, that 55% of college students experience some kind of hazing.
Mm-hmm.
I think we really need to get that statistic to our audience, because to me, that was blow your mind that could be that high. But the other part was 47% experience it before college. So high school athletics, there aren't very many, Greek life doesn't happen that I know of in high school, but there's certainly lots of clubs. And, with the social media we have now, that just makes everything worse, for them trying to feel connected, but also not wanting to belong and not that many opportunities. So, I mean, were you stunned when you got that research about that?
Oh yeah, I think there had been a study prior to the one that I led that asked about students' experiences with hazing in high school, and it was roughly the same percentage, and within 1 or 2 percentage points. And so I had a hunch we might see some high numbers, but to have it replicated there um, really was. More evidence that we need to start this education really much earlier than college
Right.
because
Right.
students are coming into college having had hazing experiences and potentially having those expectations of what is quote unquote normal
Mhm.
behavior for belonging. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about shifting the culture. It needs to happen on college campuses, but it's far, far beyond that. And thankfully, it is happening more and more. We're working with more and more high schools across the country, and I know you know it's becoming more of a conversation. The Stop Campus Hazing Act was focused on colleges and universities, but I think we'll be seeing more in terms of providing deterrence at the secondary level as well. And there's even a study that shows that middle school students
Mhm.
are experiencing hazing.
I would have to agree with that one. When I first started doing my work here, I thought that I need to talk to the high school kids. And then I thought, oh no, I think I need to talk to the school kids. And then it was, oh well, we need to get to the elementary and start this
Hmm.
earlier. And I think that is one of the myths about so many things is you think you're waiting for your child to be 20 to talk to him. That doesn't work. It has to start much earlier than that to make an
Absolutely.
impact. Yeah. So
Hmm.
what kind of advice you're a you have a high school graduation coming up and your child has now been accepted to their dream college, whatever. And they're looking at the whole thing and they're thinking about what to pack. They're thinking about, how it's going to be if they visit or they don't visit or how that goes. So, I don't think hazing probably is entering that picture. Plus we have the mentality never my child, which is my mantra. I'm always saying that's what people think, and it's not true. So what would you say to parents?
I'll hop in, but Elizabeth would love to have you jump onto it too, but I would encourage all students or all parents, both,
Mhm,
to go to hazinginfo.org
mhm,
and look up the institution that they're planning to attend. And
mm,
that is an easy access database that gives you insight immediately into what's happening. What does the hazing landscape look like at that institution? Um, has there been a tragedy on
mhm,
campus?
mhm,
Is there a history of hazing, of reports of hazing at the institution? And then look a little closer. What organizations? Is it in athletics? Is it in certain fraternities or other types of orgs on campus? Um, but to do that homework and um, get curious.
mhm.
Start asking some questions.
Mm.
Yeah.
And we also have a great blog post that a colleague who is a clinical psychologist wrote for us on, I think it's 10 tips for talking with your teen about hazing. So it's a really great, easy read and practical things to think about for how to raise the conversation in a non-threatening way and just I mean, and then I think it's just one point that Dr. Stevens makes often in that piece and other um, opportunities we've had to talk with her about this is that it's an uncomfortable topic. No parent
Mhm,
wants to think about this happening
mhm.
to their child, and so it's easy to just avoid it. It's just easier because you don't have to deal with the discomfort that it raises, and so I think that's the most important thing to say to parents is try to sit with that discomfort and use the resources that we have to have a conversation at least, and it could save your child's life.
So when they go off to college and, maybe you had this talk, all parents aren't created equal. I've certainly found that out. But, if they're sitting down with the 10 points and, actually having a conversation, and now the child, or a friend, it doesn't have to be their child, their it can be their nephew, whatever. And now they go to the college for, parents' day or not or whatever. And now they're like kind of concerned. What are some of the red flags that they should be going,
Mm.
whoa, now that can't be a good idea?
Yeah. Well, and oftentimes parents know their students best, and parents are who students are talking to, parents and other family members. Um, and so, what an opportunity to be able to notice or pick up on behavior change. Does that look like a change in the tone of your students or your family members or child's voice, or the frequency at which you're talking? Or maybe it's a change in grades, or you can hear some stress coming through that maybe feels bigger than just the stress of being a college student. um is it a change in other behaviors and who they're spending time with,
Mhm.
or maybe something that they've shared about the group that they're joining, or participating in, um feels like, oh, maybe that wasn't the most healthy ritual or a tradition, and starting to, your spidey senses might be tingling in
Mhm.
in the
That's exactly
more
right.
layman's
Spidey
terms.
senses.
Yeah.
Something doesn't feel right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But I know one of the young men that died here in Ohio not very long ago. Um, he had a conversation with his mother as he was going to, we back in the day, they used to call it Hell Night. I don't know what they call it anymore, but where they're like getting initiated, I suppose is what it really is. And, he was kind of reluctant about the whole thing. And from what I read, she really didn't know what to say to him either, except, of course, be safe, don't make bad decisions, blah, blah, blah. But, do you have any advice like that a mom would say to the child? They're now in this culture that we are trying to change, I know, but they're there and they're trying to figure out, is my child safe going to this? I mean, you don't want to like alienate your child and make them think that you don't, you're old and you don't get it, whatever. But I mean, we're talking about their lives.
That's right. Yeah, it's such a difficult situation. I think to just, help your child to become informed.
Hmm.
As Meredith mentioned, the hazing info site,
Yep.
it has lists of, has the transparency reports from all the institutions. I've heard parents talk about sitting down with their child before they joined an organization to look at this and to
Hmm.
say, look at this pattern here. This organization has been found responsible for hazing the past 5 years or something like that. I mean, or other things. Is this really, are they telling you the truth when they say they're all about leadership and service? And that's been productive. I've heard parents say, but the the scenario you raised is one that's much more acute. It's the night before.
Hmm.
And I think, all I can say is that it's an opportunity to really express concern and to reassure your child that, you know, their life is more important.
Than
And yeah.
belonging to some particular organization.
Mhm.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely the most important thing. I feel like some of the kids, though, some of the parents, I should say, send their child off to college, and they got through, and maybe they were a great student, and now they're at a great university. I mean, whatever, I don't know, but they got through high school with the drugs and the alcohol, all of the above, and now, phew, they made it into college and they're so happy. And it's like, okay, see ya. I mean, they still want to visit them. I don't mean that, but I think they kind of have a feeling, some of them, that their responsibility kind of ended at high school.
Mhm.
What would you say to that?
Oh my goodness.
Grief?
Absolutely. I mean, as a parent of of a college student and recently graduated, I mean, it changes your role, of course, as a parent, but they still need you as a parent.
100%. They need you. That's for sure. I think they need you probably till they're at least 30. I'm just guessing. And then beyond that, too.
I mean,
I have
and
6 grandchildren.
yes, and
Yeah.
and from a scientific stance, we know that adolescence now extends into the mid-20s.
Mhm.
The brain's still developing.
Great.
And so what we used to think about adolescence being, middle school, high school, now we can reframe, and that continues into college
Right.
and beyond in some cases. So the judgment is still
Mhm.
developing, and so important to have perspective from
I
parents.
also think there's a little level of a stigma for parents that think, well, I don't want to not be the cool parent, or I don't want to be,
Mm,
the one that rah rah and let's go. So often kids are not, of course, 21 when they're drinking. They're probably 18 when they go away, and so that's another whole podcast. But I think parents need to understand that that responsibility on them has not ended. If anything, it's probably just beginning because the child's now on their own. They're not living in your house. They're on their own, and you don't know what they're doing. No
mhm.
one's really telling them what to do. And hopefully, it's not somebody that's in charge of an organization that they're trying to get in that is giving them bad information and bad advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, so much of what we're committed to is ensuring that the students are being provided with the facts and with
Right.
the information, before they get into the situations, because
Yep.
we do trust them and to make good decisions when they have the information and when they're in situations where they are supported and can make healthy choices. Um,
Absolutely. We're coming up on a hard stop, but could each of you just give me any, little thing that you want the parents to take away with when they get to the end of this? And we're going to put all those websites, particularly the Stop Hazing,
no.
on the show notes. So they'll be able to get to the resources that they need. But any idea, anything you want to say?
Yeah, I think, we've covered a lot of the bases. I think, to reiterate Meredith's point earlier about hazing info as a resource and our 10 tips for talking with your teen, I think would be helpful. And just, it just, I guess, becoming informed, if nothing else, take that step to learn more about hazing
Right.
and the potential harm that can come from it. And and because everyone can make a difference. Everyone can help to shift
Absolutely.
the culture.
Absolutely. Meredith, did you have anything else you wanted to share?
I
Because you
think
pretty
we've
much covered
covered
it.
a
That was
lot.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just continuing to reiterate folks to be curious and to have these courageous conversations, even when they can
Mm.
be uncomfortable. And know that if not your
Mhm.
child probably knows somebody who's experiencing
Yeah.
this, or you're nobody's really that far removed, given what we know from the research. And so it really is everybody's responsibility to help prevent it and to be talking about hazing.
Absolutely. And I think what I always say is parents have to educate themselves in order to be authentic when they talk to their kids. Because without authenticity, you get something even the slightly bit off or wrong or what, they'll come back and say, well, that wasn't right.
Yeah.
So that's what I always say. You have to be educated and understand what you're telling them and that it is authentic. So
That's right.
I cannot thank both of you enough. I'm going to tell you this has been in the works for a long time because I just think it's so important. And I thank you so much for being on today and sharing. And as I said, we will have all this information in the show notes on YouTube and Apple so people can get it and they can get to your website and educate themselves before their child goes away to school for sure. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you,
you.
Denise. We
Well,
appreciate
that
it.
was so informative and gives parents a great resource for talking to their kids. Hazing survives in silence. So it survives when families assume not my child, and it survives when we mistake tradition for safety. If today's conversation opened your eyes, share this episode with another parent. Start the conversation before your student walks onto that campus, not after something goes wrong. You can learn more and access prevention resources through Stop Hazing. And if this episode helped you, or you feel could be helpful to another parent, please subscribe and leave a review. Thanks so much. Helping our children is our number one priority. So until next time, stay informed, stay involved, and keep stepping up to save our children. Thank you.